Bauer. I'm a professor in the philosophy department, and the reason I haven't been to any other part of this symposium, to my great sorrow, is that I'm also Dean of Academic Affairs for Arts and Sciences and have a very busy schedule, and I was really, really happy when Erin asked me if I could moderate this panel, because I then had an excuse to come and join you at this really exciting event. We have a really interesting program for you this session, the topic of which is media and the politics of the death penalty. And we're going to have 3 presentations of 4 presenters, all of whom are very distinguished practitioners and speakers. The first presentation, I'm going to introduce the speakers and then we'll just zip right through them. We're going to try to leave plenty of time for questions and comments. And do you think we should do them right after each presentation, or we should hold comments till the end? Do the participants have a view on the subject?
We have ours set up for afterwards, or we're the end. So.
Okay, so maybe we should, we'll have a little bit of discussion after the things, and then we'll have a bigger discussion at the end. So let me just introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Marc, who is a renowned documentary photographer. He has been published in a very large number of journals. The household name ones include Life, Fortune, The New Yorker, and the New York Times Sunday Magazine, and Le Monde. His work has been exhibited in museums and galleries across the United States and Europe, including at MoMA and the Moscow Museum of Modern Art, and he has received, we could spend the rest of the time just listing his awards, including the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award and the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and an Alicia Patterson Fellowship. And he has, I think the book that you have finished is just off the ground, is that correct?
It's not finished.
Okay, well he's, Marc has used the crowdfunding platform Indiegogo to help fund a book that is imminently going to appear called Final Words, which features the last statements of 517 inmates who were executed by the state of Texas since 1982. There's virtually no other visual data, if I understand correctly, besides some thumbnail-sized images or mugshots of these inmates. And the point of the book, in large part, is to raise questions about the national policy that we've had in place for a number of decades now that sanctions the state to put people to death. Our next speaker, and also the recipient later tonight of the John Mayer Global Citizenship Award, is John Artis. He probably needs no introduction, but just in case there's somebody who doesn't know who he is, he was arrested in 1966 along with Rubin Hurricane Carter for a triple homicide that had been committed at a bar and grill in Paterson, New Jersey. The police had stopped the car that the 2 of them were in and found some ammunition that seemed to fit with what the weapons that had been used in the murder scene. The police famously took no fingerprints at the scene. They were unable to conduct a paraffin test for gunshot residue. John Artis and Rubin Hurricane Carter were convicted twice, once in 1967 and once in 1976 for these murders, but finally in 1985 the second conviction was overturned, and prosecutors wisely chose not to try the case for a 3rd time. Sorry for the adverbial comment, but that was the tamest adverb I could find. And our final presentation will be by Janeann Dill and Janeann Dill here, Melissa Ferrari there. Janeann Dill is an interdisciplinary artist and filmmaker and scholar. She's also a consultant in creative intelligence. She holds a PhD in media philosophy by a school that was set up by Jean Lyotard, for anybody who that name is familiar. She also has an MFA in experimental animation. She has won many, many awards from foundations and notably from the National Endowment for the Arts. Her work has been showcased at the American Film Institute and has been exhibited widely in museums and in private collections, and she's presented lots and lots of scholarly papers on film, generally speaking, and on animation in particular. And last but certainly not least is an undergraduate here at Tufts who is one of the creme de la creme in our programs here. We have a degree that allows someone in 5 years to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and a Bachelor of Arts from Tufts. This program is so selective because you have to be an absolutely spectacular artist and an absolutely spectacular student that per year we only have about 10 students who are admitted to enroll in this program, and Bliss is one of them. She's in her 5th year of the dual degree program. She's majoring in philosophy, which makes her, of course, much more impressive than she would be otherwise. And her focus is in animation and filmmaking at SMFA, School of Museum of Fine Art, and she's from the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and we're very pleased to have her and the rest of our panelists here. So we will start with Marc Asnin, and everybody's going to speak for approximately 20 minutes, and then I'll yell at you, and then we'll have some time.
Okay, just want to first thank Erin and Sherman to make this possible, to include me. It's a great honor to be here. I'm really here because of my daughter. She was a tough student, and so that's how I got to meet Sherman. So we need to be transparent, okay? So thanks to my daughter, as better known as Lou, for making this possible. So as I sat through today listening to the other panel discussions, two of the words that sort of came away that I was thinking about was about respect and also citizenship. The reason I'm here is I've been a documentary photographer for over 30 years. So I would say like I'm a visual storyteller. The history of documentary photography is talking about people who can't be heard, about social injustice. This is the long history in what we do as a group. As today I went and I was able to pick Sister Helen up at the airport on the way back, as we got to know each other a little, I was explaining to Sister Helen how I became involved as a storyteller in the death penalty. And it was a story about Michael Owen Perry, someone who is still incarcerated in Louisiana. It was a story that I proposed to Stern magazine, and I think it's important to, as someone in the media, about what publications will look at certain stories. Again, it's a German publication similar to Time. This was in the early 90s. It's not an American publication. Even in the early 90s, as we look back and think, oh, it was great in the 70s, it was great in the 80s. Even in the early 90s, mainstream American publications were not interested in those kind of human rights, civil rights stories. And I think for the Europeans, it's the same. Like it's harder to look at your own society as people in the media, and there's commercial reasons for that, and some of that's beyond my pay scale. Okay, so, but the fact is it was for a German publication. And one of the things that they were looking at was cases that were really on the extreme end of the death penalty. Now, in Europe, the death penalty was no longer in use. And the case about Michael Owen Perry is that the state of Louisiana, and again, I'm not an abolitionist in the sense of some of the facts may not be 100%, so anyone who wants to correct me, please do, because I think we're here as a community, and I really think that's important. But basically, the state of Louisiana, as they started to prosecute Mr. Perry, realized that he had mental health issues. And I saw videotape when he first went to arraignment, and it clearly the state would say he had multiple personalities. So they remanded him to a state hospital where doctors were able to find medicine to help him with his mental health issues. When he reappeared in court, I'm pretty sure, if I'm correct, he said, no, I'm not guilty, I'm going to trial. Because the medicines helped him be able to be together enough to understand what was going on in the courtroom. When he went to trial, I think he's not on his meds, and they find him guilty. And then they give him, in the sentencing process, they find that he should receive state-sanctioned death. But as it goes through the courts, they cannot put someone who's criminally insane or has mental health issues to death. The Supreme Court had already decided that. So the state of Louisiana decided we'll force him to take the medicine to make him quote-unquote healthy so then we can execute him. Ultimately, it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which then put it back to the Louisiana State Supreme Court, and it was said that he could not be forced to take the medicine. Years and years later, when we're doing that story, we meet with the prosecutor, and the prosecutor invites the German writer, Philip Zenker, and myself for lunch. And he's going to give us his side of the story. And listen, I'm from Brooklyn. It's a special place. He's from Louisiana. It's a special place. He's a pretty big personality, and he quickly and in very strong manner tells the writer and I, they're animals. They're nothing but animals. Just never forget that. And the German writer, Philip, said, oh yes, like Hitler. And he said, what do you mean like Hitler? Are you calling me Hitler? And the German writer said, no, but I am saying you do share the same mentality. To say the rest of the lunch wasn't so easy. Now, I'm not sure what order I heard that in. It depends what point in my life you would talk to me. Either I heard it as a storyteller, as a Jewish American, or as a father, depending on different moments. What I heard and stayed with me was that dehumanization. And that stayed with me, and I always felt it was my responsibility as a storyteller, somehow in my process and in my life as a storyteller, to tell that story someday. I would tell it individually, or I would tell it in some other form. That could be in another, typically I would do other magazine stories. But 2 summers ago, as I was researching things and looking for stories, not so much to do as a photographer, because I don't really work traditionally as a magazine photographer anymore, because that's really not possible. I sort of aged out. No one liked my work anymore. There's no really way to earn a based on some of the comments before about capitalism, like during the Great Recession, I think the publishing companies, they learned how to keep more of the profits away from the workers, but that's another conversation. But I was still earning a living a different way, but I was still wanting to tell stories. And I came across that the final words of the men and women executed by the state of Texas were in the public domain. As a storyteller, the biggest project I ever did was something called Uncle Charlie. And for 31 years, I photographed my uncle. And I think it's, as my uncle would say, it's all a full circle. And I think this somewhat goes back to the panel discussion before, is that my uncle was born in poverty. My grandfather, they didn't call him gang members, but he was a wise guy. He was a Jewish guy running numbers, pimping women, doing all things that probably are not so stand up in society. in that project, in the end result, it's 31 years of my visual images, my visual opinion of my family, of my uncle, and it's his words. The narrative is in his voice. And as Uncle Charlie reminds me, you didn't live my hard life. Now, my uncle thinks I grew up on Park Avenue. I didn't exactly grow up on Park Avenue. But I did live a much easier life, an incredibly healthy emotional life compared to my uncle. So I think the strength of the book is that it's sort of like we had a dance together. But he was able to tell his story in his own words. It's from transcriptions of interviews. Now, my uncle would rather had not been edited, but I told him we weren't creating a new version of the Torah, so it had to be sort of edited. So, but he got to tell his stories in his way. The reason I tell you that is because for me, the final words, the idea of this book is that the men and women who were executed by the state of Texas are able to tell their final, to say what they thought about their lives, the crimes they were convicted of. Maybe they still believe they were innocent. Some of these men and women are taking responsibility. Many of them discuss race, class, all the issues that we're discussing here, they're able to tell in their own words. And for me, that wasn't something I felt responsible to tell as a Jew, as a storyteller, and most importantly, in my life now as a father. So over the last year, what we did is sat down with the same designer that worked on the Uncle Charlie book with me, and we put this book together. The idea behind the book, and this is a problem in the photo community, the world I come from. If you publish a book like Uncle Charlie and you sell 2,500 of them, that's really good. If you sell 10,000, that's a bestseller. I mean, that's like, very few people ever do that. So it's a very small, probably upper middle class community that sees that. The idea behind the final words was that we would do a crowdfunding campaign that would create enough money to give every public high school in the 32 states that still have state-sanctioned death a book with a curriculum so it could be taught in either what I would describe as an academic class, history, whatever, social studies, or in an art class or a visual arts or performing arts. So students like myself, who were definitely checked out in high school, to say the least, would be able to understand and be moved by these words somehow in either one of those. So over the last year, that's what we've done, okay? And Kathy from Witness to Innocence was one of the first people that we reached out to as a group that was an abolitionist group and has been very helpful. Sabrina Butler is one of the people who is a survivor of injustice, a survivor from death row. She will have the opportunity in the back of, so it's only the final words, and then it will be some exonerees who will be able to be in the book and tell what it was, and it's up to Sabrina. She could discuss her own experience, whatever she believed. She could reflect on these final words if she thought about her final words. She'll be given it. So again, it's sort of like Uncle Charlie. He told his story. I would like the voices of the people who were taken from us, and I would say in a very, vindictive, punitive way, they'll be able to tell their story. As you were introducing to me, okay, so the state of the book is that we were not successful in the crowdfunding campaign. We had a lot of press, and that was really incredible. Le Monde, the website crashed. It was the most read story, even above the horrific epidemic of Ebola. But unfortunately, it didn't, and I think it doesn't matter. The word, it didn't move people to donate to that crowdfunding. So right now, what we're rethinking is how will we publish the book so it's just not the 2,500 people who are not our audience. So Gary Knight, who teaches in Institute of Global Leadership under Sherman's leadership, he's a good friend for over 20 years. He has some contacts at the Ford Foundation. So the goal is to figure out how to still do that. Because I believe that when they talked about citizenship and responsibility, that is my responsibility as a storyteller. And as a father, when I go to my daughter's high school, now listen, some years I'm upper middle class. These days I'm sort of middle class. My wife lost a job. When I go to their public high school in New York City, and it's an incredibly diverse high school. 38 different languages are spoken at home. That's diversity. And there's all kind of, economic class going to that school. When I go in there and discuss documentary photography and I talk about social justice issues, this generation is definitely not connecting the death penalty with stop and frisk. They're not looking at mass incarceration. They may be discussing race, sexism. I don't know if they're discussing so much economic, class issues, but they're not putting those all together. So as a father, I would like to give my daughters, one who went to Tufts, as I said, I would like for them to know that their generation also has a responsibility to look back at some other human rights, civil rights issues that have not been resolved. Now, my generation in Brooklyn wasn't looking at gay rights or gay marriage or, believe me, I'm clearly not an environmentalist driving around in a huge SUV by myself every day in New York. So I'm not saying that this generation doesn't have as important battles to fight, but for me, when I go to that high school and I talk as a photographer, that concerns me that they're not connecting those pieces. So even though I'm a visual person on some level, I don't know what happened to the mouse, so that's even better. Oh, tricky. Okay, so here, and it's hard. So I don't know. Does anyone here from this area know Jim Doyle? He's a writer, former defense attorney, worked a lot on death capital cases. He's been really supportive. He lives in Brookline. And the reason I bring him up is because I can't really articulate his thoughts. Too bad he couldn't be here, but his father's ill. He talked about, he was really excited that the book wasn't another photographer photographing portraits of people on death row. And somehow he talks about it's a copy. That's where I sort of, I went to art school. I didn't go to Tufts, so I sort of lose him at a certain point. But he talks about this copy idea. And for me, the strength of the book is the minimalization of that mugshot. Now, there are people who would say, and we've talked to people in the abolitionist movement, that there should be no mugshot at all because it's a degrading element in how they're putting forward this person accused and convicted, maybe rightfully or wrongfully, of this crime. We decided to use it in a minimal way. The thing that is really stressed from a design standpoint, are the final words. The other thing is, on the bottom left, there is the crime that they were convicted of or accused of, okay, and eventually convicted. In the book, we will make it clear that that is information given to us by the Texas Department of Corrections. Because people have come forward to say that that is not the truth. And that some of these final words, people, family survivors of the executed would say that's not exactly what our family member or the executed said. So we will be very transparent with that. Ultimately, what I'm hoping is that it creates a conversation among us as citizens and moves us emotionally and creates a conversation about working against that dehumanization. Now, Michael Owen Perry, I don't know enough about his case to say, was he truly the person who did it? Whoever did that crime, it was a very horrific crime. I don't have the answer how people should be punished. That's not like my role here. What my role here is that by sharing these words and making us think about who we are as a people, then I think I've been successful. I had to leave earlier from when Erin finished up, and what's Robbie's last name? Blecker. The only thing I caught from what he was saying is that he made some point about Iran, China, and that somewhat most of the world supports the death penalty. I would say I hope on an individual basis, when people read these final words, which they'll have to deal with race, class, innocence and guilt, forgiveness, religion, many things, that they'll reflect and think, if we are a great nation, if we are a great people, why are we in certain company in the world with people that our government and many of us would say are not countries of democracy? Purnell earlier discussed democracy, and I'm sure we all have a difference of opinion on what our democracy really consists of. When I went to school, I had some Marxist teachers at School of Visual Arts. They would talk about liberal dissent. That's, again, that's for us to think about. But we as a nation definitely talk, and the media talks about Iran and China and North Korea. I would hope that we can think about, do we want to be in that company? I think as someone in the media, I've always had to look at other outlets to tell my stories. Because even when I graduated school in 1984, there was Life magazine. They gave me $2,000 to do a story about Nazi skinheads in the Klan. They were never publishing it. That's sort of like social welfare or whatever you want to call it. That's like, okay, that makes them feel like they're doing something. But they were never publishing that story. Too difficult for them to look at. And I would say that was connected to, Ronald Reagan constantly talking about how white people it was the beginning from my consciousness about reverse discrimination. About the angry white man. Now, I'm sure there were angry white men before that, but for me, there was a trickle-down theory that was trickling down to these. And these kids weren't poor. I never met a poor skinhead. Never met a poor guy in the Klan. They were all middle class to upper middle class to rich kids. But I wanted to know that story as a journalist. I wanted to know, as someone who was Jewish, firsthand what could destroy what I believe in a country that I live in. So nobody was really interested in that story. But you do now they published it all through Europe, and some French guy in Paris wrote about it, never being to America. That's bad journalism. So I think here too, as a storyteller, I'm not really interested in making pictures anymore, but I need to tell somehow about social injustice, human rights. So that's why I'm doing this. And ultimately, it took me 31 years to figure out how to publish Uncle Charlie. Somehow I'll figure out how to get this book, to students. Now, even though my daughter went here and she had a great experience, this is not the community so much I'm interested in. I'm interested in the kid in Kansas who goes home, whose father is, a working class guy, similar to like my family. My mother dropped out of school at 14 to run numbers on a full-time basis for my grandfather. But my mother broke that chain. I went to SVA, quote unquote, I have a BFA. And now my daughter was able to go to Tufts. It's about learning through your children. My parents would learn about socialism through me, because that's what I was interested in. Okay, so I got to wrap up because I talked too long, but I really would hope that ultimately that this can change that dynamic in states, because it's a state, it's based on state law, that kid going home from school can sit down, have that conversation with his parents. So thank you, appreciate it. I didn't really show anything, but.
Why don't we take a couple of questions and then we'll go on to our next speaker.
Marc, you went undercover to do the skinhead clan story?
So I didn't go undercover in the sense of, now listen, if you were my psychologist or whatever, I don't know, like did I do it to go undercover as a Jew? At that time, no. Because I thought it was a good story and I was a working photographer. Because of Asnin is a Sephardic last name, and they only think if your name is Blum, Cohen, Schwartz. Okay. They also, my mannerisms and like my Southern Brooklyn accent is not what they consider Jewish. Like to them, a Jewish male is Woody Allen. So only when I would make a mistake and say schmuck, or like I once saw a bagel in it was pre-hipster, but it was a hipster cafe in Denver. And I was like, oh, that's bagel looks good with a schmear. And the kid said, oh, that's fucking Jew food. Okay, then I wasn't going to eat it. So I didn't really go undercover, but I did it in the sense of I do want to know the dark side of what could change America in the sense of what I think is good about this country. So, ultimately, I stopped doing it because a French publication sort of outed me and said, Jewish photographer from Brooklyn goes undercover. Because that was, sensational, juicy. The French made it into, a Jewish identity. Now, maybe I did, but that's not at the time sort of what I was thinking.
How long was it?
I spent 2.5 years going all over, like Denver, Pulaski, Tennessee, Atlanta, Allentown. I networked through them. And as I did it more and more, they became more extreme. But at that point, they were full of hate, and they were doing things that could affect people in their community drastically. At the end, most of them, they were going to be hardcore felons, so the hate was part of their lives, but, they were thinking about doing things that, if you rob a bank or you do certain things, you go to jail and you sort of get convicted as for felony. The Klan, like, it was an interesting combination. The Klan and the skinheads. The Klan are mostly middle-aged white men who are not willing to act out on their hate because the Southern Poverty Law Center, I forget the gentleman's name, but he started suing the Klan and these guys, the Metzgers in California, this thing, White Aryan Resistance. They would sue them in civil court, and they would take their property when they would win. So the white, these sort of Klansmen would try to use the skinheads as their sort of soldiers. So that's sort of, what happened there. Okay. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you. John Artis, you're up.
You're hard enough to follow, Marc.
All right.
Today has been interesting and rather eye-opening from some of the things that I've heard at the earlier conferences or meetings. And it's interesting to hear people's opinions, thoughts, and viewpoints of racism. Having been born in Virginia in the 50s or 40s, I grew up under segregation in Portsmouth, Virginia. I experienced racism, outright racism, firsthand. The sense of not being able to use a bathroom, have a drink of water, go into a store, sit at a counter, go into a restaurant, things of that nature, simply because there was a sign on the door that said colored or white. No matter how badly you might have had to use a restroom or have a drink of water, you would be punished to the ultimate of the law. At some point, you might even be lynched if you were to violate the mandates of segregation, which is stay separate. You're colored only, you're white only. So I grew up with the fear of ever violating the law. That was pushed into my head pretty much as a child until we left Virginia in 1954 and moved to Paterson, New Jersey. And the reason we moved, A, we wanted to get away from segregation, and B, my mother wanted me to have all of the opportunities that I wouldn't have been afforded had we stayed in the South. So I thought that was great. And my first day to school, when my first school year came in, we moved in the summer. When September came, I went to public school number 4, and I was afraid to walk into my classroom because when I looked into the classroom, there were white kids sitting in the class. And I had never spoken to a white kid. I had never associated, played with, otherwise with any white kids. I hadn't talked to any white people. Sabrina knows, you in the South, white people were either Captain, well, shortened, Captain Earl or Captain Mitch, and Miss Ann, whoever his wife was, Miss, In some instances, if you were walking down the street and they happened to be broadsiding the sidewalk, you had to walk off the sidewalk into the street and allow them to pass, and so that you didn't bump into them or brush them, and you dared not stare them in the eye, because they say, "Who you eyeballing, boy?" And boy was a applicable insulting term, that you could be a boy if you were 90 years old, but if you were a person of color, you were still boy. Or if they respected you, they would call you uncle. So being in New Jersey in this situation, I felt okay. It's okay. My mother had to tell me that you can go in the classroom, so I did. And then I started to understand that white kids were no different than I was. We competed for grades and such. it was important to my parents, especially my mother, that I got an education. So when other kids were allowed to run around and play, I was not. I was under a very authoritative upbringing. It was disciplined. It was almost like being in jail. You know, I was taught certain traits. My mother was a domestic. She cleaned someone else's home. She, mothered their children, took care of their kids, and all of that. So, and she tried to emulate what she was learning working in the white environment to present to me, so that I would have and look like the rest of society. So I got good grades. Funny that you should say Jewish. My very first friend in elementary school was Rebecca Shrebnick. And I wish I could see Rebecca Shrebnick today, because she and I used to vie for grades, but I liked her because her father owned a candy store. So I walked her home every day. I always got a bag of candy. Then I graduated. Good grades always, learned how to play the trumpet, that kind of thing. Didn't know I was athletically inclined until I got to high school. But I desired to play sports because I had been playing in the neighborhood with all of the kids where I grew up. And I didn't grow up in a home. I didn't grow up with a backyard and a lawn. I never cut grass or raked leaves or any of that. I lived in a 4-room apartment above a used furniture store in the main business district of Patterson. It's called River Street. The river was my backyard. We lived on the 2nd floor. I used to fish out of my window, drop it down into the river and pull the fish all the way up, and it was full of carp. You dared not eat anything out of the Passaic River, you know. But they would turn gold in the summertime, so I'd catch them and throw them back out there. But that was my backyard. I'd look across the river and see everything going on, look at the bridges and the lights and stuff like that. So I learned how to play with the other guys and kids that lived, and things that my mother didn't want me to do, but I did, like playing tackle football with no equipment. I was a tiny guy. When I went to high school, I was 5'4". I weighed, 130 pounds, maybe soaking wet. And those guys taught me how to play. My father wasn't that kind of guy that would take me out and throw a ball or take me to games. He did take us to the Apollo. I got to see, Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson and Pigmeat Markham, Moms Mabley, comedians and singers. I got to see them in New York at the Apollo, but that was pretty much it. After school closed in the summer, if it ended on Friday, ironically enough, I graduated from high school and elementary school on the same day, June 17th. Keep that date in mind, June 17th. As soon as school ended, I was taken down to Virginia to spend my summers out in the country with who we call A. Annie. Cut off the aunt and aunt. It was just A. Annie, who was a very, 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 very country lady. I mean, we had kerosene lamps. We had an outhouse. We had to walk about 70 yards to the pump to get water, drinking water. She had a 3-room shack. One was a bedroom, one was a living room, one was a kitchen. I had chores. I had to go out and get the kindling to start fires for the wood stove. That's how she would get hot water. My job was to keep the buckets across the sink full of water. Wash day was a caravan because she collected water that ran off of the tin roof into tubs that she had alongside the home. When they were empty on scrub day, with the scrub board and octagon soap, when that was dumped, then you had to mop, that back and forth to fill up those tubs again so that she can complete her wash, and then she would hang that stuff up, then you could play. But she wouldn't allow me to stay at home while she would go off to work, and work was working in the fields. You had to be up before the rooster crowed, before sunrise. And the only way you could see, it was the white sand on the path that you walked all the way out to a road and you stood there and waited until a truck came and you jumped on the truck, and then they would take you to a field, and then you jump off the truck and you would see what the job was at this field. And you earn, these fabulous salaries. Like you, depending on what it was, you might get a nickel a row or 10 cents a row. And if it was corn or something, you might get 15 cents a row. And if you've ridden in the countryside, rows go up and then there's a little hill, sort of like Tufts campus. And then it goes down. And when you crest that and you look, it goes up again, and the rows just go forever. And I got smart enough to know that once you get off the truck, to run to the end of the field, where the path went around the end of the field where the tractor would go, because it had all short rows. So I would get those done real quick. And you put your initials in the dirt, and then at 12 o'clock, like a mule, you go in the shade and you eat bologna and cheese and drink water out of the cooler and stay in the shade for half an hour, then you come back and you work for the rest of the day. Then you get back in the truck and you go home. That was my upbringing. That was my upbringing until I got to Patterson Central High School. When I got to high school, I had a hound dog at my auntie's home in Virginia, and I used to chase this dog or run with him. And I'd run through fields that had just been plowed because I loved the feel of the coolness of the dirt on my bare feet, just running through the field. And then I'd come back to see how long my stride was. And then I kept always trying to extend my stride. Well, the kids in Patterson taught me how to play football and basketball, taught me. I'd hang out in the playground. And my speed increased. It got to the point that nobody could catch me, or I could outrun everybody. So when I get to high school, I asked my mother, I says, Mom, can I play football? And she said, no. I said, why not? She says, you're too small. You're going to get hurt. Well, I've been playing all this time, but I didn't tell her, with the kids in the playground. Sandlot ball, you play tackle. Well, I lied. That's the only time I ever disobeyed my mother. I lied. I forged her name on a permission slip, and I took it and I got the physical, I got the uniform, I made the freshman team. She never knew. She thought I was in the band. I used to get up every morning, 6 o'clock, leave, go to school at 7, sleep until homeroom, do classes, go out in football, come home. I got away with it for 2 years until one Saturday, home game, our school was really killing Lodi High, and the coach said, junior varsity, go in, starting lineup. Well, I was on the starting lineup, left halfback. So I get out there, and out of all of the pictures that they took that day and put into the sports section, half a page, so you really couldn't mistake who it was. A friend of mine's mother said to my mother in church, Mrs. Artis, I didn't know that your son played football. She said, well, he doesn't. He plays in a band. So then she opened the paper and said, well, it says here, John Artis, number 19, went around, So my mother says, wait till I get you home. I'm going to tell your father. Ma, don't tell me nothing don't tell Dad. Do what you're going to do, but don't tell him. But when I did get home, my mother said, I told this boy not to be playing football. He's out there playing football. He's going to get hurt. And my cool dad said, let him. Well, I don't know. He gonna break up something. My father said, let him. And from that point on, I had the carte blanche to be able to play sports and run hurdles and all of those kind of good things. And that became my life, playing sports, scholastic stuff, football, basketball, shot. Became a star. My mother then, of course, my son is a football star. He's a track star. He runs hurdles, that kind of stuff. And I was doing well. And that was my notoriety in Patterson. Didn't hang out, didn't steal, didn't shoplift. When other kids would do that, I tell them, I'll see you later. Come on, let's nope. I'm not B&E and I'm not doing any of that stuff that I run the risk of going away to jail, because jail was a taboo subject and nobody talked about it. And I didn't know anybody who had ever been in jail, and I didn't know anybody's family who had ever been in jail. I knew some kids who had been in reformatory, but not into prison. So when I see this guy after I graduate, my mother passed away 1 month after I graduated high school. But by the time I graduated high school, I had won a scholarship. I had won a track scholarship to go away to Colorado and play and run track. But I'm saying I want to play football too, because I had a dream that I was going to see if I was qualified enough to be considered a world-class athlete and participate in the Olympics. Dream. Wilma Rudolph did it, I wanted to do it. And if that didn't work, then I was going to come back to New York and try out for the New York Titans, who turned out to be the New York Jets. Had that come to fruition, I would have been on the field with Joe Namath, Broadway Joe, trying out. Whether I'd have made the team or not is a different story, but I would have tried. Had that not succeeded, then I was going to go back to school and become an athletic director or coach or something, but I wanted to be a sports teacher. Well, I met this guy one evening by chance at a friend of mine's home. By chance. I'm there talking to him, and the door opens, and here's this little guy with a hat pulled down over his head, and there's all of this hair on his face. He walks in, and he's dressed to the nines. So I said, well, who is that? He said, oh, that's Rubin Carter. I said, oh, the fighter, the boxer. Yeah. Oh, okay. So he introduces me. Rubin, this is John Artis. It's that kid that's always in the newspaper for playing football and stuff. And, Rubin said, hey. Not impressed. You're a boxer, man, but you ain't no champ. That was it. 2 weeks later, I see him. And I want to go to a different part of Patterson. And I said, hey, Rubin. And he pulled over. I said, you remember me? I met you over at Turtles. Oh. Well, he happened to know that family as well. So get in, I'll take you. So he takes me to a place that was very popular, called a Night Spot. Very, very popular black bar. And I loved to dance. I still do, just older. But I loved to dance. So I would go in. People call me dancing boy. When I would walk in, women wouldn't dance with me. No, I'm not dancing with you. Oh, come on, please. No, you're going to show me up. And Rubin enjoyed watching me dance. So I danced. I danced, and I had my thing going on. And when it was time, last call alcohol, I saw him getting ready to leave. I said, hey, can I get a ride home? He said, sure, I'll take you home. But if I'm going to take you, here are my keys. You drive. You got license? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, then you drive. I said, okay, cool. No problem, as long as you're going to take me home. And it took me 15 years to get home.
Wow.
15 years it took me to get home. And when you talk about the press, the thing about the press is the sensationalism of any allegation that they jump on. All of the information that they get comes from police headquarters and their informants or their contact in police headquarters. Any story that you read about in the press is only a one-sided story, just what the police are telling to their sources. You never get the source of the other side. My source didn't come out until we went to trial. I had religious, pastors, preachers, teachers, coaches, parents coming up and said, not that kid, not that kid. Maybe another kid, but not that kid hurting somebody. No, not him. They had a composite drawing that they put into the paper to try to locate whoever the perpetrator of this crime was. And they put a picture of me next to it, and it doesn't match me at all. But they said, John Artis, this is the other guy in the press, the other guy who committed this crime. And then they had the assailants being two tall, light-skinned Negroes with thin pencil mustaches, one of these that I've only been able to get in the last 60 years. both of them weighing between 180 and 200 pounds, standing 6 foot, 6'1". That was the description of the assailants. Rubin was 5'8", extremely dark skinned, with a full face full of hair, mustache, goatee, all that stuff, and a bald head, his boxing persona. A little guy. I could put my chin on Rubin's head. But they're looking for two light-skinned Negroes, both about the same height. We were stopped by a police officer en route to Rubin's home. And there were 3 people in the car because another guy said, "Hey, Rube, drop me off too." He said, "Sure, get in the car." 3 people. They're looking for 2 in a white car. There's 3 of us in a white car. We're going to Rubin's house. The guy pulls us over. He says, "Hey, let me see your license and registration." I said, "What's the problem? I wasn't speeding." And he looks in. He says, "Oh, hey, champ, I didn't see you." "Oh, well." Rubin said, "Well, what are you looking for?" He said, "Well, we're looking for 2 black males." So Rubin said, "Any 2 will do?" So he said, no. I said, "Go ahead." And he let us go. We go to Rubin's home. He went upstairs and did what he was going to do. We come back. I go drop this guy off. Now I'm going home. I'm tired. It's after 3. And the same police officer pulls us over again. But this time, he called for assistance. And when assistance arrived, rather than telling his supporting cast, "Oh, wait a minute, I had stopped these guys before and there were 3 in the car," he didn't say a word. He didn't say anything. He simply allowed another officer to take over, and they took us to the scene of the crime. Not to police headquarters, but to the scene of the crime. In a police caravan, leaning out the windows with guns pointed at the car, and our car right in the middle, and then they make us pull up and made us get out of the car and stand there amongst all these people who had congregated from all of the hula that was going on there, and made us stand by the wall. And 20 minutes later, had a police wagon come up, a paddy wagon, and put us in it after they had been rolling sheet-covered bodies out of the building, and took us to police headquarters. And then took us from police headquarters to the emergency room of the hospital where one of the surviving victims of this shooting was, and made us walk right up to his gurney in the emergency room and asked him, "Are these the 2 men who shot you?" And the guy shook his head, "No." But still they took us back to police headquarters and questioned us for 17 non-stop hours. Non-stop. And gave us a lie detector test in the process. And they were telling me, this detective, D. Simone, "Clear this dark cloud from over your head. There's a gray dark cloud over your head. Just clear this cloud from over your head. Tell us what you know." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything, and why am I here?" And then I had an officer walk in with some bullets, the same bullets that you were talking about. And he said, "Look, I just found these in Carter's car. Take them and look at them." I said, "I'm not touching those. I watch TV and the movies. I'm not touching those." But the bullets that I saw in that officer's hand were not the bullets that showed up at trial. The bullets that he showed me were the regular ones that you see in a police officer belt with the silver cap, but the gray heads, gray lead. The bullets that those people were shot with were copper-coated heads. It took them 5 days to bring those same alleged bullets from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor to put into the evidence room. They started out as 22 by the coroner, but by the time they got back down to the 2nd floor, they were 32, which were the actual bullets that those people were shot with. Now they didn't, I don't know, you've probably seen the movie and read the book and all that other stuff. The 2 guys that were the star witnesses that my friend Freddie Hogan was able to track down and get them to recant their testimony and tell that they had lied. They lied because now they were in a jam. They were getting ready to go to jail, and they told them, well, we know who committed those crimes. And the police officers said, well, who? He said, it was those two guys that you brought to the scene. That began a nightmare. Freddie got their recantation. Freddie. That's him, right there. Until Freddie showed up, he showed up. We had gone through a 6-week trial. 6 weeks. The only time in my life I have been exceedingly afraid was May 29th, 1967. That was the day that a jury came back into the courtroom after only 4 hours of deliberation from a 6-week trial, with the verdict. We were on trial for the death penalty. When I saw the women crying and nobody looking at us, I knew, I said, Rube, we in trouble. And when the jury foreman stood up, and when the judge asked him, have you reached a verdict? And he said, yes, Your Honor, we have. You know, the typical thing you see in the movies. And he says, what's the verdict? He said, we, the jury, find the defendants Rubin Carter and John Artis guilty, and my knees buckled. It was though somebody had hit me with a good right hand and a left hook following it. My knees buckled, and if it wasn't for the defense table, I would have fallen on the floor. And then he hesitated. He looked at me softly, but when his look went to Rubin, it got hard. You know, very, very, very squinty-eyed, hard look, cold look. And he said, with a recommendation for mercy. And I had no clue what had just happened to me. What does that mean? I asked my attorney. He said, well, you're going to get life. Because first-degree murder is the only time in New Jersey that the jury determines what your sentence is in your verdict. And then a month later, of course, we got sentenced. And the judge said to me, Mr. Artis, you have caused a great deal of turmoil not only in the city of Patterson, but my home as well. There was no reason for you to go into that bar and murder those people totally unbeknownst to you. I firmly believe that Rubin Carter was the leader and you were the follower, so therefore I'm going to give you another lease on life. And I hope in 15 years when you return, you come back a better person. And then he sentenced me. And those are some serious words. God, I don't even know how Sabrina stood up or dealt with it. But to hear somebody say, I sentence you to the New Jersey State Prison at Trenton for the term of life for the rest of your natural life on the first count. And on the second count, I sentence you to the New Jersey State Prison at Trenton on the count of murder in the first degree to run concurrent to the first, and the same for the third count. 3 counts. Concurrent life terms. 3 concurrent life terms. To Rubin, he said, you are an antisociable, cold-blooded murderer, and it is my duty to society and to the bench to see that you never ever walk the streets of society again, and sentence Rubin to consecutive life terms. That's the only time I've ever been afraid, when they come back with that verdict. Years later, one of our attorneys, Harold Cassidy, interviewed some of the people on the jurors, some of the jurors. And one of the ladies told Harold that we had them guilty before we even went into the jury room. The only thing we had to decide and had trouble with was whether or not to send the kid to the electric chair. So the only thing that saved my life and Rubin's life at that juncture is the fact that I was 19 years old and I did not have a record of arrest or any being in trouble at all. That's the only thing that saved my life. So they couldn't separate it. They couldn't give Rubin a chair and let me go. So we both got life terms. But then 10 years later, after Freddie showed up and got us back into the limelight, brought attention to our plight, and got us back into court, got the recantations, which of course the trial judge says, it doesn't have the ring of truth. It was okay for trial when they say, yeah, him and him, but now, oh no, it doesn't have the ring of truth. So he denied it, this same guy. They took me home one day, about 3 or 4 days before Christmas, almost 10 years later, because now things have been going on, appeals and appeals and appeals. And they take me to my father's home, and there I am with these two guys that the governor, Byrne, who at the time was a prosecutor in Bergen County and was prosecuting these two star witnesses, interceded on their behalf to have their charges reduced so that he could give them probation because they were afraid to send them to prison because friends of Carter's in order might kill them. So they had get out of jail free cards to do whatever they wanted to simply because Rubin and I were in prison. So this guy Hawkins, who was an assemblyman, a councilman, he was a councilman, and he had a private investigator, Peterson, prefaces a statement with my attorney sitting there, my father is sitting there, and he says, we know that you didn't kill anyone, but we think you were there, or maybe you knew something about it. So if you simply sign this true statement that says that Rubin Carter was the murderer and you were either there or you knew about it, we can have you home by Christmas. And I told him what he could do with his true statement. So I'm not signing that because that's a lie. And that man right over there taught me not to lie. I didn't do it when you tried it 10 years before. I'm not doing it now. And that's why Rubin, my boy, my partner, my companion, my friend, calls me his hero. I didn't know at 19 that I had integrity. But I would never, ever sacrifice someone else's life to protect my own. Ever. I like the underdog. I don't root for teams that are on top. I want to see the team that got everything to gain by beating somebody on top win. Unless you're a Giant fan, of course. You know, and all throughout, I mean, the press, I mean, they gave the allegation of this crime, the major part of it, they said, was me. There were 2 weapons used. One was a shotgun, one was a pistol or handgun of some sort. They gave me the handgun. That was their allegation. You had the handgun. Well, the handgun shot everybody in there. So they gave me the handgun. And as Rubin would say, if they thought that we were really, really sincerely guilty of that crime, 19 or 9, they would have burned us to a bacon rind. Rubin's words. If you believe that. Of course they didn't. But, you know, as time, you know, Rubin and I did 2 separate kinds of sentences. 2 separate kinds of sentences. I did a less arduous or harsh sentence than Rube. I went in there with the only thing I knew how to do. Score touchdowns, score baskets, run real fast. Freddie Hogan came to one of my championship football games in there, and we won. Big. I could do that. But then I got involved in organizations. The Lifers Group, I became vice president, found out I had some smarts. I was vice president when the Lifers Group in Rahway, New Jersey, created the Scared Straight program that you saw on TV. We won an Oscar. I had an Oscar in my hand, although the state took it. but I had an Oscar, and CBS gave us this big old plaque with a clock and stuff in it. And then I was president of the JCs. Went to the Giants and Eagles football game in Princeton, and I'm in prison. Then they had a riot, and I saved 4 guards' lives because they were going to kill them. The guys had come up with the term, all right, let's have some fun, man. Everybody that want to let them go, get on this side. Everybody want to kill them, get on this side. I said, not a good day to die. I looked out the window, and the parking lot was full of National Guard, state troopers, local police, corrections officers from everywhere, and Freddie Hogan. Freddie came in to do the negotiations. I thought it was ludicrous when they were talking about killing these guards, and one of the demands was they wanted inflatable dolls. They did. Freddie will tell you, we want rugs on the floor, we want to be able to write anybody we want, and we want inflatable dolls. Not today. I let them go. And for that, the Department of Corrections couldn't let me go home, but they took me from behind the wall of maximum security and put me in an honor camp on a farm with no gun towers, no fence, no walls, and they allowed me to attend college. They would drive me 40 miles away to Glassboro State College in New Jersey, drop me off on campus at 7 o'clock in the morning, unchaperoned, not reporting to anyone, and then not come back and pick me up until 9:30 at night. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. After 10 years of incarceration. They even allowed Fred to take me home on 14-hour furloughs, and I wasn't eligible. If they knew what me and Fred did, they'd lock both of us up. But he was the only one that was permitted to take a lifer out who had not gone to the parole board, who did not have a release date, home for 14 hours. Freddie Hogan. He and that guy and I have been connected at the hip since the 1970s. Fred, you know. And it's all because of him. He's like the foundation. And then Tom Kidron came, you know, Tom was dealing with Rubin in one place, and I'm out there running around on the campus of Glassboro State College. Rubin was in there battling, trying to get us out. Rubin said to me, John, in Rawway, he said, John, you're a real trooper. You do what you do, and I'll get us out of here. I said, okay, Rube. Well, I did what I do. I won trophies, scoring titles, most valuable player, all that, you know, championship stuff. That's what I did, and I ran organizations. And when I went to the parole board, I got an 11-day date set, unheard of for a lifer. Unheard of. Usually when a lifer went to the parole board, he would get an 18-month release date or a 36-month release date or a rehearing date at either 18 months or 36 months. They gave me an 11-day date set. At the end of our second trial, we lost on December 22nd, 76. They released me December the 22nd, 1981, 11 days later. And then they told me, don't tell anybody that we're going to grant you parole. I said, okay. The following morning, headlines in the newspaper, Artis to be released on parole. Well, why did you tell me not to tell anybody then? Because I had plans of what I was going to do. You know, and such. And so now, my partner's gone. But he created Innocence International. And actually, he dedicated all of his life after getting out of prison to getting other people out of prison. He was inundated with requests as the leader of AIDWIC, Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted, organized in Canada, in Toronto, Canada, and then he branched off from them and created Innocence International. And even on the threshold of death, when he was dying from terminal prostate cancer, he made a plea to New York to release a gentleman who had been arrested at 16 and had been in prison for 29 years. You may have read about that being here in Boston. And he just got released. He got released about 3 months after Rubin died. Yeah? Innocence International. And my reason for being here, I brought to Cape Cod, I gave Sherman all of Rubin's memorabilia stuff. I still have a few other things to get to him, to be housed here in Tufts University. Even his ashes, which are at the Morrison house where I'm staying. I'm hesitant to let go. But the guy's with me all the time. But it's my intent to see that the integrity of his legacy and his work and his accomplishments go forward. Like Marc was saying, younger minds, clear minds, like my boy there, younger minds, clear minds, intense minds, to really battle this thing that we call the justice system, which in prison we say, just us. J-U-S-T-U-S. Just us. So anyway, that's what I have to say to you. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Too bad that we don't have a lot longer for these amazing stories. I think what we should do is we have enough time for you guys to go, and we'll have another set of amazing stories. So, Janeann and Melissa, take it away.
So my plan for tonight was to show you two short films and a clip from a longer piece. And I think we're just going to go to the longer piece, and then you won't be able to see the whole thing because it's a feature-length film. But I think it would be good to go to that because it underscores beautifully what John Artis is the gift he just gave us. So I want to talk a little bit about this film and tell you that it's an animated documentary. It's a new, I am not the filmmaker, but I worked with the filmmaker for 10 years as she was putting this together. And I, like you, Marc, wanted to come away with some words of like what did you take away? Your takeaway, respect and citizenship. And when I was listening to you, John, I was thinking of my own childhood. We are of the same age. And so I was thinking of my own childhood in the South and what that meant for me seeing those signs. And it pains me. It absolutely pains me to say that. But I'm with you here. So this is an animated documentary. We can talk about animation as the creation of film from nothing, right? I mean, it's about sort of filling the void. And we can talk about documentary as the documenting. So the camera is important in documentary because we are being documented at this moment. So you think of documentary in that way. So of those two combinations, we have the animation, we have the documentary. What is it? What are we really talking about here? And it's this film is a way to try to get at truth. Okay, so philosophy department, I'm with you. Sheila Sofian is the filmmaker for this film. It's called Truth Has Fallen. And she is documenting the people who in the room may know, probably do know, the Centurion Ministries and the Innocence Project with James McCloskey. And so he was a consultant on this film. Barry Scheck was a consultant on this film. She has PhDs in psychology who were consultants, and so she has done her research. Sheila is a filmmaker, many years, an associate professor of film at the University of Southern California in LA, and it's beautifully animated with painting on glass, and you'll see that there are over 20,000 paintings that make up this piece. And it's gonna be a harsh cut when we do, because again, this is a feature film, but at least you'll have a taste of what the film is about. Although it occurs to me that a trailer might actually do that as well. No, let's go ahead. So let's take a look at this, and then Melissa has prepared some just very brief bullets for discussion, and it'll be short, and then we can turn around and give the whole panel. Is that workable? Okay, good. Okay, so let's do this. And somebody, I guess, will get the lights, or can we do that here? I was one of the original historical catalogers for the survivors of the Shoah Foundation in Los Angeles, Steven Spielberg's foundation, where he took testimonies. And the goal was to take 50,000 testimonies. And the purpose of that was to show that even though we have individual incidences, they all hold a similarity. And that's what I feel like this underscores for all of you in the room. I asked you earlier, did you know Joyce and Brown? You know, because and what we've heard today is so similar to this film. And Sheila doesn't know you, and you know I think truth can happen when enough people tell the same story, although they don't even know each other. So in terms of the film, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who, by the way, was also my student, not just yours, and was an intern at the Institute as well, so we like to claim her.
Do you think we could also show the 1 minute animation?
Yes, well, 1 minute, yes.
Yes, we have.
Yes, okay, good.
I just feel like it's...
This is the Amnesty International.
Yeah, the wax one. So first off, I just want to say thank you to Erin. I'm really happy to be talking about the use of animation as a tool for talking about topics like this. And I became interested in the use of animation for documentary actually in Dr. Dill's class about 1.5 years ago. And I think that film that we just showed, as well as Sheila Sofian's film, both embody really well why I think animation can be so powerful for talking about social injustice and other documentary topics. And we were talking about truth a lot. You know, the title Truth Has Fallen. And I think it's really interesting to think that maybe animation can convey a truth that could be even more powerful than just using conventional live-action filmmaking. So I'm not going to talk that much because I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the animated films and your reactions, but just a couple of things that I've been thinking about as a filmmaker in this context. Marc touched on a lot. First of all, just the ways for distributing films like this and the way to reach the goal target audience. So like you were saying, you're trying to talk to kids in Kansas, not just people at Tufts University or people who already stand with these things. So that's one thing to think about. And then also just how to find a balance, which also touches on the subject of transparency and combating sensationalism and making films that can stand on their own, not as sensationalism, but can reach a deeper topic. So with those in mind, does anyone have anything to say just about the use of animation as a medium before we go into general discussion about the media? Or any reactions to watching the films?
I'm so impressed how powerful it is. At first I thought when you said animation it was going to be like little cartoon characters
Right.
moving around. I didn't. And it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, that's part of our goal here too, is to show you that animation is a powerful medium, and it's not just cartoon. It's not just the gag, you know.
Excuse me, who made the Amnesty?
It's Amnesty International. It's a French company named Digital Design, so it's from France.
And what was the song the piano playing?
That I
Oh,
don't know.
that's a good question.
It's just a soundtrack to that piece. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, I mean, obviously it's so much more than a cartoon, but at the same time, I think what's so effective about animation, and I mean, Pixar does this with its own animation and its own emotional storylines that they tell, is that I do think childhood is our doorway into understanding animated messages. There's something about it that is inherently juvenile and universal that we all experienced when we were young, and so that kind of lets us walk through the door where there's so much more depth behind it than we were expecting. So something like that opened with an image of more or less toy soldiers, something that very universal, very childish, and then turned into something more profound.
Do you have a response? I do if you don't. I would dare say that it's the mark of the hand. It's the mark of the artist, even though that we all relate to. It's the hand, which is a language in Heidegger. It's a language and a gesture. You know, so I would dare say that it's also that mark of something personal, reaching out to the audience as well.
If I could intervene here too, we have a couple minutes up, but I just want to make a comment too, which is that all three of our speakers in very different but in incredibly powerful ways, or all three of our presentations, show the power of storytelling as a way to make an argument. And philosophers are fond of making arguments in different ways, where we have a set of premises that we hope we can are unobjectionable, and that we use a little bit of reasoning and we reach a conclusion, and that's a way to do it for some people. But the way to tell a story that has its own kind of narrative logic, its own kind of visual logic, is so powerful an argument. It's not just something that pulls at people's heartstrings. It makes the case, and I just feel I want to personally just testify to the incredible power of these moments. I feel so privileged to be able to hog the floor for a moment here and say that and sit among the company of people who are doing this kind of work. And I know that we have a room full of such people, and I just personally want to say, as somebody who teaches philosophy and is sometimes vexed and confused by that, to thank you so much for this experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So shall we, okay, I was gonna say we could open it to the whole board.
We could.
Do you think
Why don't we
that's
take a few minutes?
conclusion?
What we have scheduled now is dinner, to which you're all invited from now until 7:30 when we pick up the evening part of the program. But if we want to, I don't know, we want to take another 5 minutes to see if there are other things people want to say. And absolutely, and we segued very quickly from John's presentation to Janeann and Melissa's also. So I want to acknowledge that fact and ask for comments and questions for anyone on our team.
Yes, I want to say something else about the animation. I think for me, there's an interesting tension between it being depersonalized because we're seeing animation, and yet that allows me to look at the story without getting hung up over whether this particular person appeals to me or not, or whatever. I mean, that shouldn't make a difference, but it does. So this tension between depersonalization and very personal kinds of stories forces a different approach to the issues at hand, I think.
Yeah, I agree. That's interesting. We agree. We.
I guess I just had another question about animation. I find it like a very, almost an interesting problem for documentary, animated documentaries. So how do you, so A, do you think there's a problem there? I guess B, do you worry that there can be a sensationalist import to animated images? And C, can that, is that a good thing? Or is that a bad thing?
I'll let you go there first, Melissa, because you approached that topic while you were talking.
I think that's probably the most challenging part for the filmmaker is trying to balance the sensationalism that could possibly happen. But I really think that similarly to what you just said, by abstracting the identity of the characters or the images, it allows you to think about the theory behind what's happening and the issues behind what's happening more so than when you're just getting involved with the details. And there's something about looking at the actual images of a person that you just inevitably think things about them. And so, in a way, like I was saying, I think you can reach not deeper levels of truth, but other ways of looking at things that are equally valuable in documentary as the actual depiction of the objects or people.
And I think I'd like to throw that to Marc too. Do you, in terms of sensationalism in documentary, because your photography is dealing, and the book, all of that too, I think it applies not just to animation.
Right. So I think when it comes to sensationalism, sort of what I discussed earlier, and when you were some few minutes ago, I was thinking about it, some word up. In my career as a magazine photographer, I would think a lot of times your imagery, I mean, when Sherman brought up the skinheads, I was part of a really bad process. Even though, believe me, once I gave a lecture in the photo class and the teacher was from UPI, and when I said skinheads were blah, 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 pretty graphic, he told me my lecture was over. I wasn't objective. I wasn't a journalist because I wasn't being objective. I don't buy into that, at least my generation. I can have an opinion and still make my story. But I think for me, I was part of a very sensational process. I never controlled, letting a French publication write about skinheads. They never met them. This sitting in Paris, they never, I think, and listen, it's not just the French. I mean, I think they may be better at it, but no, but listen, I could look back and say, was I a responsible journalist in that story? Probably not. And I was part of a sensational process. Here, okay, I'm not like the book I'm putting together of the men and women who were executed, I'm not trying to earn a living from that, you know. Now, I'm not telling you that I won't get a salary or like that there's not money involved, but I earn a living a different way now. So I'm gonna be much more conscious based on that. And again, I'm not comparing, like I feel like I have that responsibility. I believe the death penalty personally is wrong for many reasons, what I discussed the demonization, but I also think I wasn't a responsible photojournalist, documentary photographer, in letting my pictures be written in Europe. That's just irresponsible, you know. I knew then, but I think John was talking about, you know, doing, you know, like, I wasn't in a position either, you know, I didn't have the balls, I didn't have the morality, I wasn't good enough of a journalist to say, no, I won't participate in that. So I think I was part of the sensational process, you know. So.
And in terms of documentary, and I'd like to hear your responses too, in terms of documentary, especially documentary film, and if you're talking about it being problematic, it's only problematic for the documentarians who don't use it. You see what I'm saying? Because the animators are the animated documentary, and what you didn't see is that there's a lot of live action in here using very still images. But it's a feature film. It's on the festival circuit. It's just won some beautiful awards throughout Europe. It just won a Justice Award in the Barcelona Film Festival, and so just keep a watch for the film itself. And she has received, it took her 10 years to do this, and I'll get back to my point in a minute. It took her 10 years to do this. She had a Guggenheim and a Rockefeller and a Pew fellowship to do this piece, so it is a labor of love in every way. But documentary itself, the word to document, is not without a point of view. It's really important that you understand that, because the camera angle, the kind of narrative that you're telling, it all has a point of view. You know, it's like, to say that documentary does not have a point of view is like saying reality TV doesn't have script. You know what I mean? It's impossible. It's impossible that a point of view is not going to happen. Errol Morris is a fantastic documentarian. If you want to look at Thin Blue Line, any of that work that he does. So the animated language that's introduced into documenting is a language that is suggesting that you go farther. You must go farther, and it's not. And even this is very illustrative. It's very much like it illustrates, you know, the characters themselves. But we never see these people. It's only we hear their voices, and so their voices are identified with these sweeps of color and motion and emotion in that way. Did I at least approach the topic?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly didn't mean to suggest like no documentary point of view, or you know, I guess.
Well, I'm still coming off the pivot of truth. There's point of view, and then there's truth, and then there are other things, you know. So that's why I was responding to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think
truth comes in different clothing.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
Fair.
I think we have a lot to think about, and probably people are also hungry. I feel very privileged to have been able to be here, and I'm sure on behalf of everyone